start with a disclaimer, and that's that I am the parent of a 4th grader and a 6th grader, and we all know that the cardinal rule of parenting is that we say, do what I do and not just what I say. Looking at the difference in what I'm going to tell you to do, and sometimes what I myself might do as a parent, do what I say and not always what I do. So, let's start, and I think there's a clicker over here. Let's see if it works. I put my email address up there. If you have questions or comments, other points of view you'd love to share with me, feel free to email me at any point. I'm really pretty good about getting that. There we go. All right. You have to start. Ned started with you a pop quiz, but this is varsity now. This is the big league. This is your final exam. There's one question, and there's only one right answer. And don't you dare ask me for a second chance, a do-over, a lifeline, a friend. You can't talk to your spouse. You can't talk to the person next to you, and you better get this right. So, do you want your child to A, be happy in school, B, well, that's good. You're brave enough to raise your hand. I thought you just went there in anxiety. Be happy in school, learn a lot for getting to the right college. Okay, I hope you've all decided, because here's the right answer. Okay, this is why you came tonight. This is why you fought in the downtown, parked in the garage, or paid $100 for that. I'm kidding. There's actually not one choice. And if there is nothing else that you take away from tonight, it's this. Don't let anybody tell you that those choices are exclusionary. In other words, you should be able to have a child who can, maybe not every moment, but be reasonably happy in school, learn a lot, and get into, at least for them, a great college. It's not only impossible, it's actually what you should expect a school to partner with you to do for your child. So, as you're digesting this incredibly countercultural statement I just made, I'll give you a couple of things to think about, maybe to help it seem a little more sensible. First of all, if we say, well, you know, to really learn a lot, it's going to be miserable, right? I mean, my child's going to work hard, my child's going to do all this homework, they're going to complain, and my role as a parent, right, is it's going to keep a stiff upper lip and say, great, yeah, now do it, and it'll be good for you. It's like getting them to swallow medicine when they're sick, right? Well, definitely sometimes you have to hold some feet to the fire. Definitely you have to be firm. Let me ask you this. Whether you work outside the home or you are a full-time caregiver for your kids, if you really hate that job or you're really good at it, I mean, honestly, even if you go to work some days, like, I really don't want to go to work today, I bet you're going to make a conscious effort to find the part of your job that you like, get satisfaction and fulfillment from, and concentrate on that. And you might even make a conscious effort to avoid or spend less time on the parts that you actively dislike. Well, if school really is supposed to be a place where students hate it or are miserable in order for some future success, then what happens? They graduate and suddenly they find what they like to do, love to do in life. Those two things don't seem to match up to me. Same with anxiety. Everybody gets anxious, everybody feels stress. But how many of us would say, if we had to come up with a great idea, and we got a meeting with our boss maybe the next day, how many of us would say, what's your idea? Do it, what are you doing? Don't you have it? Let's see, come on, you can do better. It has to be perfect. Gotta be perfect, you're gonna lose your job. Yeah. I mean, it's common sense, really. This is not fancy stuff here. This is common sense. But really, I think for hundreds of years, schools have gotten away with telling you, you have to make a choice. Okay? You can have school A. School A is a really nice place to be. You love your children. Your children play a lot. Your children feel cared for. Your children are happy. Try not to notice that they're not really learning stuff. Or you go to school B. School B is rigorous. Okay? Yes, your kids have no fun. Yes, they have 4 hours of homework in second grade. But you know what? It's worth it because they'll get into college X and they'll get their right job and they'll be leaders of the free world, etc., etc. And you'll maybe get to put one of our bumper stickers on your car. And, you know, we can keep going. That is really pernicious choice. I put this, and it's a joke to myself, because I used to teach Latin, and all of us Latin teachers in the room, right, know that rigor really means not hard, it means stiff, like rigor mortis. And so often, you know, I think as parents, and sometimes as educators, we sort of accept that as true. Well, to learn a lot, it's going to be really hard to the point of severe pain, and maybe you'll die. Resist that, if anybody tells you. So, by now you'll have figured out that I think your children should be generally happy learners, healthy, including sleep, successful. What else? Well, here's a partial list I would have for my own children and all of my 542 students. Confident. Confidence is key. Curious. You want them to ask why. How is that? Tell me about it. Collaborative. The real isolationists are not going to be successful in the next century the way the world is going. We want them to be accepting. Accepting not only of people who are just like them, but accepting and actively interested in people who are very different from them. We want them to be self-aware. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I'm sure we've all had moments where somebody says, boy, you're really like this. And we are. Hey, you're right, we are. I am. For a lot of that, when it's about our learning style or even our personality, it's amazing how many of us figure that out in our 20s or 30s, or never at all. And I would argue that even as our children are growing and changing, it's very possible for them to be self-aware of who they are and how they learn and what their passions are, as Ned says. We want them to be independent. My youngest students are 2. I got a couple of them out of their cars today in lower school carpool. Our oldest are 18 and going off to college. When they're 2, I'll do certain things for them that I generally won't do when they're 18. I hope that as parents we're all the same, and that none of us have plans to get that second condo that happens to be a mile down the road from our children's college rooms. But if you do, you wouldn't be the first one to do that. But really, if you'd like them to be independent and resilient, there's a lot of research that says right now if there's one emotional trait you want your child to have, it's resilience. It's not success the first time. It's what they do when they're not successful, so that they eventually are successful and feel successful. That's a huge determinant of success in life. We could have put more things, but the slide's only that large if I'm nearsighted. So, as a school, I'm a big believer, what's your job? My assistant head of school, I respect a lot, likes to say to upper schoolers, your job is to be a student, which is a wonderful way of thinking about that. It also normalizes your adult life, by the way, to them. You talk about your job, whether that's raising them, your work outside the home. Okay? Your children have jobs too, as a student. Well, here's what I would suggest that all of our schools' jobs are, whether we're co-ed or single gender, religious or secular, large or small, serving younger children, adolescents, all the variety. I think our job is to know and inspire each student as a person and as a learner. That first verb is one of the most overlooked verbs in the English language. Know. Not N-O. That's a good one too. It's not a verb. K-N-O-W, know. No good education is possible without a healthy relationship. You know that as parents. When your relationship is working well with your child, this is when it's working well with your spouse and partner, things go well. You are more effective in your job as a parent or in your role as a spouse and partner. Well, the same is true for schools. So, if you're choosing a school, wherever you live, whatever kind of school, I hope that you get a sense of how will this school know my child? The fact that you're in this room, and I'm assuming that most of you send your children, or if they're graduating, have sent your children already to good independent schools, means that you get that already. And parents really do understand that. We can talk about all the programs we want, all the great places we send our kids, everything else. Really, essentially, the number one reason I believe that families choose schools is because we really know our students. And if we don't, we're failing. And I don't care whether we're small or large, we're failing. The second little arrow there is a different kind of knowing and inspiring. Teachers need to understand how learning actually happens so that students can realize their potential. Let's say that you have a serious illness, and you walk into the surgeon, and she says to you, "No problem. I'm going to operate on you just the way I operated on your mom, just the way I operated on her mom, and so on and so on." And they go and get the little jar of leeches, and bring them out. You're going to run screaming from that office, unless you're an incredibly over-trusting person. Well, why is it that for generations we've accepted schools, and as educators we felt perfectly comfortable saying, well, that teacher's been teaching that way for 40 years. And it's worked really okay for most kids. I mean, really, I've heard that. I think early in my career I said stuff like that. We should be improving. Yes, there are certain things that are true over time. Things about character and values that hold true, and even some traditional teaching methods that can be helpful. But in the last decade or two, there's been an explosion of research and understanding about how brains work, about how learning actually happens, about how two students who could be the exact same age chronologically and seem very similar actually learn in different ways. And for schools or educators to basically say, it's worked pretty well so far, I think is unacceptable. It doesn't mean that we'll be perfect with your children or mine. Just as you can read every book about parenting and not be perfect, if you're like me. But we should really be improving in our actual pedagogy. What we teach and how we teach it should reflect our understanding of the realities of what a 4-year-old is ready for, what a 14-year-old is ready for, the range of what is normal there. It should reflect the idea that we can actually learn that from being in relationship with students and give that information back to you. I'll give you a great example. When Ned did that great exercise with the S, and I secondly said 3, that's a basic exercise in something called saliency determination. Fancy word, what does it mean? As adults, we know what's important. We picked out the important words there, and our brains put the little ofs to the side. Well, what do we do as teachers? I taught English and history and Latin. I taught almost everything, frankly. I taught a lot of saliency determination to kids. This is what's important. I just didn't know that I was supposed to do that, and I didn't understand early in my career how critically important that is when you were teaching writing or a foreign language or trying to read a history text or do a project. So that's a fair expectation that you can have with schools, that we actually are actively interested in the science of learning, that we're spending our professional development budgets and time on, that we're hiring for that and evaluating faculty on that and talking with you about that in parent conferences and comments. Again, we're not neuroscientists, but we've got a lot to learn from folks like that. Here's the last one, all right? You can all go home and tell your kids that in this school used the F word tonight. Okay? Schools must let students fail, put little quotation marks around that, the right way as part of a healthy learning process. Remember what I said about resilience. But I really want to be careful about this point. School B that I talked about early on, the one that says it's going to be hard, you're going to do all this homework, it's going to be miserable, you get to a good place. Well, sink or swim. Used to be favorite expressions in schools like that. Throw them in the deep end, and most of them will come up for air. Those that don't, well, this wasn't the right place for them. Which, is a pretty good feeling from the teacher's point of view. Like, wow, if you were successful, I get to take the credit from it. So if you weren't, well, I guess you weren't supposed to be here. Well, I'm batting 1,000. That's great. Well, on the other hand, those school aides, can protect students from difficult experiences all the time. Sometimes with the active abetting of parents who want to really be helpful, right? So where's the middle ground? If you believe that somehow learning to struggle, learning to work through some adversity, and coming out with that experience, but also coming out with a good sense of self is important, here's what I would suggest. You want your children, I want my students, to have a difficult experience, but to understand the difference between challenge and failure. As long as you try, I would argue, it's really hard to fail. And the converse of that is true. The worst kind of failure is not trying. Let me give you some examples in my own life. And I'm comfortable doing this because I've said this to my entire student body before. 12 years ago, I was a candidate to be a head of school. And I went through a grueling process. I was interviewed, my wife was interviewed. We filled out all these applications. We met with everybody. It was a 3.5-day interview. And a month later, I found out that after 4 weeks of deadlock, the school had chosen somebody else. And I said to students, was that failure? I didn't get what I wanted. At that time, I wanted to head another school. I didn't get it, so that's failure, right? Well, it's not. I tried hard. Finishing second ain't bad. And it worked out pretty well, at least from my perspective, because I loved being head of St. Andrews for 10 years. Right? And I learned a lot from that experience about what I did well or didn't do well, but I had to learn more about. For students of almost any age, and particularly in middle and high school, that perspective is not natural. If they are not perfect, sometimes defined by what they believe our expectations are as parents, sometimes defined by what their friends have told them they got, sometimes defined by what they heard somebody once 10 years ago had done, then it's failure. And two things happen. Either kids become perfectionists and they just keep going and keep going and keep going to their detriment. They stop learning and just over-focus on trying to get that one thing right. Those tend to be the girls. Not always, but they do. Or they do this. I really tried. I know I could do that, but not going to do it. Not my thing. Good boys. If you doubt that, just always get a group of boys together and say, so how much homework did you do last night? You'll hear, I did an hour. You did an hour? I did that in 30 minutes. You did that in 30 minutes. I just looked at the cover of the book and did it. Get a group of girls and they'll say, I did 4 hours. 4 hours? I did 5. I haven't slept in 6.5 weeks. I wish I were exaggerating when I hear that stuff. Right? And both of those things are connected to failure. One of the books that's on Ned's list, a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, I put on your reading list if you haven't read it. And it's a great explanation about what failure actually is and how this aversion to possibly failing is one of the great blockers to learning and development for our children, and sometimes for us as adults as well. And as I'll talk about in a minute, by the way, part of the worst part about failure is not simply that you don't feel good, is that you don't discover some of the passions that Ned talked about. There are the early passions. Some kids love to read from the time they start reading. Some students love to build models or play a sport or an instrument. But a lot of great passions are developed later in life. Maybe you don't take up that sport until you try it at club level in college. But if you've already decided you're a bad athlete, not going to happen. Maybe you really figure out that you really can write once you understand yourself as a learner. But if you've already decided you're bad in English, and you better stick to engineering and only engineering, as if engineers never have to write, not going to happen. That's the importance of helping students fail and then understanding the difference between real failure and what they thought was failure. Because they actually can get better. There are very few walls they run into if they're optimistic about their own abilities and can draw on those inner strengths in the tough times. All right. So enough about what we can do with schools. What's your job? Parents have jobs. Okay? Well, the first, and I always believe on a test you should start with the easy question, the one you go, great, got it. You love your children unconditionally. I would seriously doubt if I asked any of you, do you love your children unconditionally? You say, That's different from always liking your children every moment of the day, let me say. There are times it's got it. But damn deep we love them. But telling them that we love them unconditionally, not in front of their 6th grade friends, necessarily, but in the privacy of your own home, is a really important thing to do. And they may take 5 repetitions a day, it may take 5,000 repetitions, but that is a key to their long-term happiness and health, and yours. Saying something, you hearing it over again and over again is good for you as a parent too. At least it certainly is for me. The second is to be clear about the values that shape your home. Not their friends' homes, not the 80% of the parents who let the kids get the cell phone 2 years before you did, not what they saw on television or they read on the internet, what your values are. Ned is absolutely right about listening and being in dialogue. But those few clear values. We look each other in the eye when we talk, and we tell each other the truth. And in return, I will not react like a crazed animal when I hear something that I don't like. At least I'll do my best not to. Those basic values are really important, and it's totally okay for those to be non-negotiable. Not everything between children and parents can be negotiated. You just don't have the time and you don't have the emotional energy. And honestly, they don't have it either. They don't know that, especially if they're really good debaters. But they need you to sometimes say, just that is, and we're moving on. The third one, I think, is related to what I said earlier about faculty having to teach in a new and better way. Here's something that I'd ask all of us to parent in perhaps a different way than we were taught. So your child comes home and brings home that A. Say, well, that's great. You were always good in English. What did you just tell them? All right, you kind of did what you were supposed to do. B. Okay? Or comes home and got a C in math. Or a D or an F. Well, I know it's not your strength. Don't say that. Okay? Now, here's what you can say. Well, let's talk about that. What seems like you did well. Why do you think you did well? And don't let them off the hook with, well, I'm a good writer. What did you do well? What did you learn from that? Okay, you didn't really do well on tests. So if you had to do it over again, what could you do differently? I know you worked at it. What could you do differently? One of the things that schools don't do nearly enough of is something called recognition. It is teaching students to learn how they learn and talking about it. I wish every school spent time before every assessment talking about strategies of learning, and afterwards didn't go over the test or whatever it is. Like question 1, the answer was 6. Who got 6? Okay, great. You got 5? All right. See me after class. But rather, engage students and got students to engage each other in a conversation about how efficient and effective was I in preparing for that assessment, that test, that paper, that project. We do it in our lives all the time. We are reflective. I really doubt that if at work you got bad feedback from your boss, you wouldn't sit and say, so what is it that he or she expects, which is part of a way of saying, how can I do that differently? Or could you give me feedback on that? Kids don't necessarily know to do that. They internalize it and personalize it. It becomes part of their identity. I'm bad at, or I'm good at. So I encourage you to have a few conversations that you can as what you're bad at or good at. And much more about you were persistent, but you could be more persistent. You were resilient, but you could be more resilient. You use the resources that are out there. You want your kids to be the ones who go to the professor in office hours or raise their hands in class. Two great indicators in my experience: the students went to schools where they were known and cared for and taught to think. You don't have to use the word metacognition. It's totally okay. When in doubt, sit on your hands. Okay. This is easier when we know our children are going to make a really small mistake. And we say, well, that's okay. He or she will learn from that. But when the stakes, the way we feel it, get high, they don't get that good grade, and they won't get a good grade, and they won't get into that college, and they won't get, and we can do that. We can really get ourselves going. Our natural reaction is to pursue and rescue. Or even worse, to prevent, sometimes in the first place. There's a distinction here. Huh. So you're gonna go out Saturday with your friends. Okay? So what's your plan? Okay, that's perfectly appropriate. As opposed to, don't put that answer, put this answer. We know we wouldn't do that to our kids who are trying to learn something. But think of how many other areas sometimes. Don't kick the ball out. What you need to do is overkick. Kids can get overcoached or over-directed, and therefore they really don't trust themselves to know the right answer, figure it out, or if they get it wrong, to figure out why they got it wrong. I do have a great worry about that in this generation. Students who seem to perform very well in highly structured environments have not learned the interpersonal social skills in unstructured environments, have not had to negotiate what happens when they get it wrong, and also are not used to, when they get it wrong, seeking help and advice. Oftentimes, I think kids with their parents, and even with their teachers, sometimes go, I got a B, and that to me is fine. I got an A-, don't be upset. Isn't what we want them to say, I tried my hardest. I think I did these things well. I need to improve over here, and I can't. That's what we want for them. And if they do that, they'll not only get in, by the way, to really good colleges, they'll be very successful once they're there. So I think that brings me to the end of what I was going to tell you. No, wait, I might have one more. Oh yes, I'm going to tell you a story. Perfect, I'm only 3 minutes over. Here's the story. And it happened in my school, but it could happen in a lot of different schools. A student transferred into St. Andrews in 7th grade, girl. Very bright, motivated, great family. Just hadn't been terribly successful in the sense of top of the class, etc., in her previous school. And at the end of the year, her father came to me. Now, this guy was retired military. Not somebody, having known him, I liked him very much, but I wouldn't say he wore his heart on his sleeve most days. And he had tears in his eyes. And I was thinking, this must be really bad, whatever it is. And I started hearing myself, flat expression, what's going on. And he comes and I realize this is getting close to me. That his tears are actually joyful. He's happy. And I said, what did he say? He said, Robert, I want to thank you because I never realized before that my daughter could be happy and get an excellent education. I say that, I'm obviously proud about St. Andrews, but I say that not to tout St. Andrews in particular, but I've always held on to that. And I say it to people a lot because it strikes me that for somebody who is a leader, highly intelligent, to feel that those were choices, you had to choose one or the other. It goes back to that first slide I showed you. That's really tragic. And so I'll go back and end where I started. Don't let anybody tell you you have to make that choice. There'll be good days and bad for your kid, there'll be good moments and bad. But please don't tell them or make decisions feeling that it's an all or nothing. They'll be successful or they'll be joyful. They need to be one to be the other. Thanks very much.